Morning, raise your hand. We'll say good morning to everybody joining us online. So glad to have you with us here today. And I hope that all of you are doing well, and I hope that you're able to get out and about and enjoy some of this beautiful weather we've been having. It's been rainy, but it's been warm. So I will take that trade-off any day. So at least on the rainy days, we have those breaks of moments where it's just really nice and sunny, and we've been able to have our windows open at the house a lot this week. So I've been really grateful for it, and I'm so ready to see this warmer weather coming in. So if you can't tell, my family and I, we've been fighting a cold at our house this week. So I probably don't sound the best, so please forgive me. Or, if I have to stop and take a drink, know that is why. So one thing is for sure, that with God's help, we will get through this morning. So, amen. Today we are back in Joshua. Today we are in chapter 6, if you want to go ahead and turn there. Joshua chapter 6. And this morning I wanted to start us off with a simple question. Have you ever had a moment in your life where you fully believed that it is God who was leading you to do something, but the plan didn't make much sense? Maybe you felt God leading you to step out in faith in some area of your life. Maybe it was trusting that God knows what He's doing, even when the situation didn't make sense at all. And the big one that I can think of, that I'm sure every one of us at one point or another has dealt with, is, maybe you've gone through a rough season. Whether it be with grief, loss, or something painful that you had to deal with, and then you are wrestling with all of these questions, saying, God, what are you doing? I'm sure that we've all had moments in our lives where, we have stopped to think, Lord, what are you doing? But it's in those moments of our life that we go through. It's in those moments where we kind of stop and think, God doesn't say that we can't ever ask questions like this. He never said that we're not allowed to stop and say, Lord, what are you doing? He never says that we can't do that, because it's in those moments when our faith, it becomes real. Because it's during those times when nothing makes sense. The path before us, it's not clear, but yet the Lord asks us to trust Him. Even when we don't understand what He's doing, He asks us to continue to follow Him. And this is exactly what we're going to see today. This is exactly where the people are in Joshua chapter 6. They're camping in Gilgal. And, they had been restored. That Gilgal, the name of the city or the name of the camp that they are, literally means, rolled away. We know that they have been restored. It says all that reproach had been rolled away from them. God prepared all of His people, including Joshua, like we had seen last week. So all of the people have been prepared. And now they're ready to move forward. But immediately, they're going to have to face a massive obstacle in their path. It's the city of Jericho. So we're going to see that Jericho, it wasn't just a normal city. It was built like a fortress. And yet, this city that is so well defended, this is the first city that God moves the people forward to face. And when we see in chapter 6, what we're going to see as we go through it, is that God is going to defeat Jericho in a way that makes it absolutely clear that the victory belongs to Him. So for our first point today, we're going to see how faith trusts God when the situation looks impossible. So if you would, read with me verse 1. It says, "Now Jericho was straitly shut up because of the children of Israel. None went out, and none came in." This short verse that we see, it sets the stage for what's about to happen. Because this city is on high alert. They've shut the gates and nobody is coming in or out. They are on complete lockdown. Because this city, they know that Israel is camped outside and they're not very far away. And they know exactly what this means. Because if you go back to what we've already covered, if you go back to chapter 2, when the spies went to Jericho and we got introduced to Rahab, even back then, we see that Rahab had said to the spies, she says, "I know that the Lord hath given you the land." And then she goes on to say, "For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea." This was back in chapter 2, before they had ever crossed the Jordan. The people of Jericho, they heard about the Red Sea. They had heard how Israel had already taken down other kings during their time in the wilderness. And now they're at the point where they've crossed the Jordan. They're on that other side. They are in that promised land, and right now they're close to the city of Jericho. Jericho knows this. They know that they're about to be the next target, and they're terrified. They know that Israel is coming for them next. So they go into a complete, full lockdown. Now, for us to understand this, one thing that I love to do when I'm studying is I love to get into the history of things and look up all the information that I can. I try to just learn every bit of it that I can. So one thing that I really love to do while I was studying specifically for this one is I wanted to see what the city of Jericho would have looked like. Because this wasn't a little city with kind of a wooden fence. I think about the things that I've seen in movies where it's like a fence and it's like a bunch of logs standing up, maybe pointy at the top, and they've got one of those gates that you let down with a chain. It was not like that at all. That's what I imagine, but that's because I've seen too many movies. So we see that Jericho was a fortified city, just meaning that they were built specifically to defend against attacks. And what I found very interesting was that we know today where this city of Jericho is. Archaeologists, they have already been there. They have been excavating this location for many, many years. And what they have found gives us an even more in-depth picture of what Israel had to face here in this story. The ancient city of Jericho is now at a place called, and I'm probably going to butcher this completely, but it's Tel Es Sultan. Probably butchered it, but if you ever want to look it up, you know that is what it is. Tel Es Sultan. And what they found was that this city, it didn't have just one wall for defense. It had two. So Jack, if you want to go ahead and pull up the picture that we have. What I had found is, this is, of course, an artist's depiction of what the city walls would have looked like. This city was built on top of a mound. So, of course, if you think about what a mound is, everything's flat and then it's a mound sitting there. So this first wall would have been a retaining wall. And that is going to be at the base of the mound, and it went all the way around the city. And they found that this retaining wall stood about 12 to 15 feet high. Let me see if I can get this working right now really quickly. So this part right here is the retaining wall. And you see they've got little cartoon soldiers to show you that when Israel came to this wall, this is where they would be standing. So this is the 12 to 15 foot high retaining wall of Jericho. On top of that wall was an additional wall that was built. And they said this was built out of mud bricks. But this wall that was on top of the retaining wall stood an extra 20 feet or more. Together, this is just the first wall of defense. And this first wall was potentially 35 feet tall. Imagine that. You're looking at this city that you're about to have to face, and the wall itself is 35 feet high. Now, if you're attacking this city, and you just so happen to be able to get over this first wall, the next thing that you're going to face is this steep, sloping embankment right here. So not only do you have to get over this wall, but then now you have to climb uphill, and then you're going to be met with the second wall. This is what the defenses of Jericho would have looked like. And Jack, if you want to go ahead and switch it to the next picture even. This next picture is what the city of Jericho would have looked like as a whole. Now, I'm not going to go too in depth with this because we'll cover more of that next week, but you see they have the retaining wall. They have this wall. They would have had to go through right here, which would have been the embankment. And then they had the upper wall that protected the main part of the city. This is what it looked like, potentially. Of course, this is an artist's depiction, so it's not perfect, but it's pretty close to what it would have looked like. And you have to understand that this city, it's not crazy large. My Bible even gives me details saying that this city only covered an area of about 8.5 acres of land. I know some people that have farms larger than 8.5 acres. So the entire city of Jericho was only 8.5 acres of space. So thanks to our modern archaeologists who have been studying this location, when we say that Jericho is a fortified city, we understand that it truly was a fortified city. They were built to keep these enemies out. Now, for ancient armies to be able to attack a city like this, they would need some gear for battle. They would need what's called siege ramps. It's ramps literally to help you get over defenses easily. And they would need battering rams. That is for the soldiers to literally try to knock down the wall so they can get through the defenses. And even if they were trying to attack the wall, you can already imagine that Jericho, they're not just going to leave their walls up and say, well, that's our only defense, that's it. No, they are going to have soldiers stationed at the top of those walls, and they are going to be attacking from above, trying to keep the people out. So when you look at this city, let's just say that you are not going to walk in this without a fight. You better be ready. And when you look at Israel, they were not some, really well-prepared military people. They were not, fully kind of decked out in all the military garb, and they were not ready for a battle like this. They didn't have the materials and the things that they would need in order to attack a city like this. And when we see this and we understand kind of what this city would have looked like, what Israel is about to face, it made me think back to what we seen last week at the end of chapter 5. And I can completely understand now why Joshua had went out to look at the city and he had that alone time trying to just look out and plan and think about what's going to happen, because I would be doing the same thing. I'd be looking at that city and say, how in the world are we going to attack this place? From a human perspective, it looks impossible. This was an impossible task ahead of them. And yet, this is exactly the point. When the situation looks impossible, that is when God's power becomes undeniable. Joshua had already been reminded right before this that this isn't Israel's battle. This battle belongs to the Lord. Now, as we continue on with the next few verses, I just want you to pay close attention to what God commands them to do. Because for this next point, we're going to see how faith obeys God even when his plan doesn't make sense. So read with me now verses 2 through 5. And it says, "And the Lord said unto Joshua, See, I have given into thine hand Jericho, and the king thereof, and the mighty men of valor. And ye shall compass the city, all ye men of war, and go round about the city once. Thus shalt thou do 6 days. And 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of ram's horns. And the 7th day ye shall compass the city 7 times. And the priest shall blow with the trumpets. And it shall come to pass that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when ye hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city shall fall down flat. And the people shall ascend up every man straight before him." So we've already set the scene here. We already know that this looks like an impossible task that lays ahead of them, that this city looks like it is impenetrable. Nobody's going to get into the city, especially right now. They are on full, complete lockdown. So they've already got their guard up. But yet, in verse 2, God says, "See, I have given into thine hand Jericho, and the king thereof, and the mighty men of valor." God says, I've given it to you. In other words, he's saying that this victory over the city, it is already his. This battle has already been won before it even started. Now for Joshua, to hear God saying this, I'm sure it would have been very encouraging. They've already seen God do some completely impossible things. Imagine seeing God just stop the waters of the Jordan and then you walk through. What an impossible thing. But it gets really interesting here when God gives them the instructions of what he wants them to do, because now they get to play a part in this. He says, I want you all to march around this city once a day for 6 days. Have the priests carry the Ark of the Covenant, and have 7 priests blow trumpets of ram's horns. Oh, and by the way, when you do this, I want you all to be silent. I don't want your voices to be heard. But on the 7th day, I want you to walk around 7 times. And when you do this, I want you all to shout. And when you shout, the walls are going to fall. Imagine you are a soldier hearing these commands. You'd be thinking, huh? This isn't a battle strategy at all. I'm being told to march around this city and have the priests blow trumpets. I almost feel like it makes me think of like a marching band, Now you're like a marching band blowing trumpets around this city. This doesn't make sense. And it might sound foolish for human understanding, but your faith requires you to obey God even when the plan doesn't make sense. God's not asking you to understand. He's asking for you to obey. And this is something that we are always going to struggle with. Because naturally, humanly, we would love to see how it is all going to work out. We would love to know and understand the whole plan before we begin. But that's not how faith works. Faith is saying to God, God, this doesn't make sense at all. But I trust you enough to follow your commands. Because God's already promised them the victory. He's promised them victory now multiple times that we've seen throughout this book. And we're just getting into chapter 6. So he's promised them the victory, but this victory requires them to follow his instructions even when it doesn't make sense to them at all. And that is what brings us to our third and final point for today. Because faith continues to obey God, even when nothing seems to happen. So read with me now verses 6 through 16. And Joshua, the son of Nun, called the priests and said unto them, Take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord. And he said unto the people, Pass on, and compass the city, and let him that is armed pass on before the ark of the Lord. And it came to pass, when Joshua had spoken unto the people, that the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns passed on before the Lord, and blew with the trumpets, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord followed them. And the armed men went before the priests that blew with the trumpets, and the reward came after the ark, the priests going on and blowing with the trumpets. And Joshua had commanded the people, saying, Ye shall not shout, nor make any noise with your voice. Neither shall any word proceed out of your mouth until the day I bid you shout. Then shall ye shout. So the ark of the Lord compassed the city, going about it once. And they came into the camp, and lodged in the camp. And Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord, and 7 priests bearing 7 trumpets of ram's horn before the ark of the Lord went on continually, and blew with the trumpets. And the armed men went before them, but the reward came after the ark of the Lord, the priests going on and blowing with the trumpets. And the second day they compassed the city once and returned into the camp. And so they did 6 days. And it came to pass on the 7th day that they rose early about the dawning of the day and compassed the city after the same manner 7 times. Only on that day they compassed the city 7 times. And it came to pass at the 7th time, when the priests blew with the trumpets, Joshua said unto the people, Shout, for the Lord hath given you the city. Right here is the response that we see with Joshua and Israel. They are following God's instructions. And I want you all to picture this very clearly. All of the people are outside of Jericho, looking ahead at this very impossible task, looking at this city. Maybe they're still thinking to themselves, how in the world is this going to work out? But nonetheless, they form a procession, and soldiers go out, then the priests and the ark, and then more soldiers to guard the rear. And they start to march. And while they're marching, they don't say a word. The only noise would have been coming from their feet hitting the ground, It would have been their armor kind of clinking as they walk. And it would have been the sound of the trumpets being blown from the middle of this procession. And they go around once, and then they go right back to camp. The next day, same thing. They form this procession, and they march. The third day goes by, the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth. This whole time, it's been silent. Nothing has happened. They're just marching around this city. And I'm sure, they said that this is 8.5 acres, but I'm sure that when you were, battle ready and you're carrying all your gear, and you're walking around a city that is 8.5 acres, I'm sure that they were getting worn down. I'm sure that the sun was beating down on them. This is all stuff that I imagine when I think of this story. The sun was beating down on them. I could have just imagined all the dust that they were kicking up as they were walking around the city. That dust would have been getting in their eyes and, in their nose. They would have been breathing it in. All of this, the elements would have been getting to them. But they continued to follow these instructions anyway. None of it made any sense. The people, they could have said, well, nothing's happening. Shouldn't something have happened by now? What if God got it wrong? Or maybe they blame the leader a little bit. What if Joshua got it wrong? This isn't what God said. This doesn't make any sense. How is this going to help us defeat this city? I'm just marching around the walls. It sounded crazy. Even when you read it today, when you imagine it, it still sounds crazy. But nothing is impossible with God. One detail I want to point out is I want you to notice the placement of the Ark of the Covenant. It was included in this procession, and it was in the middle. Now, the Ark, it wasn't typically used in battles in this type of way, but this is what God had commanded them to do. This isn't just a parade. They're not just parading around the city, and this was not just a symbolic march. By having the ark in the middle of the people, they knew that the presence of the Lord went with them. Every step they took, they were not alone. The Lord God was with them. He wasn't distant. He didn't just give them the instructions and then watch from afar, making sure that they follow all the instructions correctly. He was right there, right in the middle of the people, each and every day. Now the people, they did exactly what God instructed. They had 6 days of silence. 6 days of marching around the city. But nothing has happened yet. And it's in those 6 days that their faith was being tested the most. And yet they continued. Then the 7th day comes around. And they go around this city 7 times. The trumpets are all sounding again. And it comes to when they finish that 7th lap around the city. And the priests they're getting ready to, blow the trumpets with that final loud sound. That Joshua commands them. This is God commanding them to break their silence and to shout. My voice was a little better. I'd shout a little louder, but don't want to risk it right now. And when they shout, the walls fall down. You see, this didn't happen on the first day. It wasn't on the 2nd or the 3rd or the 4th. It wasn't on the 6th day that this happened. Those days were days of obedience preparing for what God was about to do on the seventh day. And this is the picture for us today. Persistent obedience matters. Having faith is continuing to obey day after day, step after step, even when nothing seems to be happening. These people, as they were marching around this city for 6 days, from their perspective, nothing was happening. But they are continuing to follow where God was leading them, and they were trusting in His plan for their life. So as we come down to a close for today, we'll be covering the second half of this chapter next week. I want to ask you, where in your life are you being asked to keep marching? Where is it that God is calling you to remain faithful even though you can't see what He's doing? Maybe it's in something that you've been praying for a long time. Maybe it's an area of your life where you have been faithfully serving and faithfully trusting in God, and yet it feels like those walls that are out in front of you, they just haven't budged at all. If this is where you are this morning, I want you to remember something. Just because you can't see God working doesn't mean He isn't working. When Israel was marching, they could have said, these walls haven't budged a single bit. Maybe they could have thought, well, maybe piece by piece, little by little, these walls are going to slowly start to crumble. And for 6 days, nothing. But even during those 6 days, God was still working. God was still moving. He was preparing for what He was about to do on that seventh day. He was preparing for the moment when those walls would come down. It may be the same in your life right now. The prayers that you've been praying, you're trying to live faithful and obedient day after day. And if that's you, I want you to know always that God sees it. He knows where you are. He knows what you're going through, and He's working, even if it doesn't make sense to you yet. If this is you this morning, this is your reminder to keep the faith and trust in Him even when you don't understand. Or maybe you're here today and God's calling you to recommit to having this type of faith. As a Christian, in our walk, or maybe in this case you'll say in our march, where we are following God and where God leads us, there may be times, and I'll even take out that word may, there will be times in your walk that you will stumble. If somebody ever tells you otherwise, I'd be careful about that. Because we are not perfect people, we are human. Each and every one of us are. So in your walk, in your march with God, there may be times that you stumble. Maybe you get discouraged. Maybe you go through one of those hard moments and you start wrestling with those questions about what God is doing, and you start wondering, are things ever going to change? If that's you, this is your reminder to get back up. Don't stay down. Continue walking that path that God has set before you. And I'll say that it may be hard at times. God never promised for it to be easy, But I'll tell you that the path that God has before you, that path always leads to life. You might be walking and you might feel like you're getting worn down. You know, the elements might be getting to you. The sun's beating down on you. The dust is getting to you. You know, the things of life that seems to hit you from every angle. But I'll tell you that when you're going through a rough patch like this is why it is so important to have other strong Christians around you. Because I'm sure that when you were walking, you know, if you think about Israel, they were all marching together. You know, it makes me think about people in the military. You know, so many times when people are in the military and they're going through their training, you know, they say, well, sometimes, you know, when it got so hard and I was ready to quit, the only thing that kept me going was my brothers beside me. Sometimes, if you are going through a rough patch, if you have strong Christians beside you, we will encourage you. We are walking the same path with you. We're just trying to follow what God has in front of us. When things get hard, we will stick with you. So I want to say this morning, if that is you, if you feel like maybe you've stumbled, if you feel like you've gotten discouraged, this could be the moment that you just recommit to that walk. Continue following Him, even if it doesn't make sense. Wherever you are this morning, this altar is open for you. If you need to come and pray, you pray. If you need to come and recommit, or maybe you just need to ask the Lord for the strength to continue on, I invite you to come. If God's speaking to your heart this morning, then step out, come before Him. Let's pray together. Let's trust in Him, no matter what type of walls are in front of us. Whatever God has laid on your heart this morning, this is a time for you. So as we get a verse, this is your time. It's just you and Him. So as we get a verse.